Oh. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming and for being here today. So the Committee on Culture and Justice and the committee, I'm going to call for the Committee on Education and the Committee on Housing, Utilities, Public Safety, and Homeland Security is now called to order. Today's Wednesday, March 7, 2018. The time is 3:03. This is a joint public roundtable discussion, and notices were disseminated via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets on February 27, 2018, and again on March 4, 2018. The notice was also published in the Guam Daily Post on February 27, 2018, and in the Pacific Daily News on March 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7. I'd like to thank my colleagues for attending this afternoon's roundtable discussion. To my left is Senator Frank Agustin. And to my right is Legislative Secretary Senator Regine Biscoe-Lee. Thank you again to the panel participants present today. I would just like to go around very quick and all of you introduce yourselves so that everyone else will know who you are, and then we'll get started. If we could just start on my left.
Press that thing. I'm Vince Napoli from the Superior Court of Guam, Marshals Division, Training and Staff and Development Section.
Good afternoon, Rudy Gaza. I'm the supervisor for the Juvenile Probation Office, Superior Court.
Melanie Brennan, I'm the Chief Probation Officer, Judiciary of Guam.
Buenas, Chris Anderson, Student Support Service Division Administrator, Guam Department of Education.
John Fernandez, Superintendent, Guam Department of Education.
James Lon, Chair of the Safe and Healthy Schools Committee for the Board of Education.
Mark Manila, Chairperson of the Guam Education Board.
Maria Gutierrez, Vice Chair of the Guam Education Board.
Joe Carlito, Derrida Precinct, Guam Police Department.
Darren Caldwell, Tumon Precinct Commander.
Good afternoon, Captain Kim Santos, Guam Police Department. I am the commander for the Agate Precinct.
Good afternoon, Senators and everyone. Attorney General Elizabeth Barrett Anderson.
Fred Nishihira, Deputy AG.
Thank you again. And I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the Senator Joseph Agustin, who's also conducting this roundtable. It's a joint roundtable together with his committee. All right, the agenda items that will be heard today are the following: existing Guam laws, penalties, and standard operating procedures related to deterring or preventing gun violence in our schools. The recent mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida, which claimed the lives of 17 high school students, is the latest in what appears to be a growing trend of gun violence on school campuses in the United States. These tragic events have prompted great concern for the safety of our students on Guam by students, parents, school faculty and staff, and community members in general. In a proactive effort to ensure that we do everything possible to prevent such violence in our schools, we've called this joint roundtable discussion today. I'm going to now these are just a few rules of engagement because we've got quite a few people here. To ensure a respectful, productive, and timely discussion, we've set the rules as follows. Each member of the first panel take no more than 10 minutes to provide feedback based on the set of guide questions that were provided preceding today's discussion. After the first panel provides feedback, community members in attendance are invited to contribute to the discussion. And finally, we ask that participants respect the opinions and beliefs of others that differ from your own. All right, so we have in advance sent some questions to each of the different entities, and to summarize for the public, we've asked our panel members to speak on the following. We've asked GDOE what are the proactive measures being taken to prevent gun violence on school campuses and the ability of school counselors, teachers, and staff to apply interventions and strategies to aid students in emotional distress and identify students who may be prone to violence. Also, to speak on current visitor policies, Are there areas that can be improved upon? We've asked the judiciary, represented by the probation office, the chief, to provide feedback on school resource officers, scope of duties and level of training to investigate, conduct searches, identify and neutralize threats of gun violence on school campuses. We asked our SROs trained to disarm a perpetrator in the commission of an act of violence with a firearm. What are the other ways that SROs are trained to assist a student and students at risk? We've asked GPD to inform of the nature of gun crimes as it relates to minors, illegal ownership, the legality of block stock devices, the impact of recent changes to concealed weapon ownership laws, whether they believe GPD needs more discretion with issuing concealed firearms licenses. We asked whether GPD speak on the efficiency of background screening procedures in detecting felony convictions, domestic violence, drug convictions, and history of mental illness, as is required by statute, and the effectiveness of current firearm and ammunition storage regulations and penalties in preventing children from accessing guns and accidental shootings. We've asked the Attorney General to also speak on the effectiveness of current gun ownership laws and penalties to deter gun violence in our school system, firearm and ammunition storage regulations and penalties in preventing children from accessing guns and accidental shootings, accessibility to guns as a condition of pretrial release, and challenges to pursuing firearm violations. Finally, to give suggestions for changes to any laws and penalties to ensure safety in the schools. So we're going to begin with the Department of Education and Senator San Agustin, if you may proceed. And I think the superintendent has a presentation prepared. Please proceed.
Mr. John, if you can go ahead and proceed with your presentation, because you have a copy of the questions, am I correct? So if you can go ahead and respond to that, and if you have anything else you wanted to add to it, you do have the board here, so good afternoon, board members, Mr. Chairman, Vice, and Mr. Guåhan.
If I could, I know we have a board representative who oversees the Safe and Healthy Schools Committee, so if I could allow him to go ahead and lead off, and then I'll follow in with a lot of the details.
Before we begin, may I also recognize the presence of Senator Telena Nelson, Chairperson of Public Safety Committee. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Senator Terlaje and senators of the panel and members of the roundtable. Thank you for the invitation to join this roundtable on behalf of the Guam Education Board. As chairman of the GEB Safe and Health Schools Committee, the issue of preventing gun violence is something we must continue to review and improve in light of the tragedies that we have seen on the mainland. The Guam Department of Education is one of the most prepared agencies in the island, whether it be during typhoons, fires, bomb threats, etc. We have policies in place, procedures outlined, and ongoing training and exercises for our administrators, faculty, staff, and students at the school sites. We require monthly drills and exercises, and we support the continuing training for all types of incidents that could possibly take place at the school. With the potential of gun violence and the rising threat of active shooter incidents, we must go above and beyond what we have done in the past. We are working hand in hand with law enforcement agencies to get all of our schools trained to respond to an active shooter incident and to improve strategies for response and communication. Currently, we will have of our schools trained by law enforcement by the end of the school year, and we'll continue to work until all schools are addressed. We are reviewing our existing policies for campus security and visitors. Essentially, our school administrators have full authority with regard to the security of their campuses, and we have asked them for their continued input regarding how we can improve. Of course, the answer we get is a need for more staff to assist with manning the gates and in providing general support for any incident. The other response is to have more resources to harden and protect our facilities. Even further, repair or improve of fence lines, gates, construction of gates, monitoring stations, intercom systems, repair of doors and locks, and even metal detectors and of the sort. The superintendent and his team can walk through the details of what we have in place to protect our schools, but I want to emphasize one major concern that the GEB has at this particular moment in time. Recognizing our fiscal situation, it is difficult to discuss further budget reductions to this department at the same time. that we are here to find ways to improve protection for students and employees against gun violence. I ask the members of these committees work hard to insulate the Department of Education from further budget cuts so we can ensure that we do not impact the ability of our schools to carry through with their responsibilities to keep campuses safe. Our administrators, faculty, and staff are the front lines of these issues, and we ask that we find additional ways to support them in their efforts to protect our students. Con respeto.
Thank you very much. May I also acknowledge the presence of Senator Will Castro. Thank you, Senator.
Good afternoon, members of the various committees. I believe, and I have extra copies if anyone needs of the testimony that I brought today, so if you require further copies, I do have them available. What I wanted to do is just, again, add some of the details. You did send 4 questions, and I'll get directly to answering those questions, but I do want to just say to begin with is that, you know, this is a department with 30,000 students, 4,000 employees, and the primary mission of DOE is to educate the students and to maintain our campuses and clean and safe operations. So just to do that requires a lot of training, a lot of preparation, a lot of staffing and resources to maintain that level of readiness just to conduct daily operations. So when you add gun violence and incidents like potential active shooter incidents to the equation, it raises the stakes enormously. So, you know, I think across the country, they're still trying to gather data and try to clean data to track these types of incidents. I think at one point we hoped it would be very rare, but since Sandy Hook, there's been a lot of more of an effort to track these types of incidents, whether it's active shooter aimed at employees or students in the schools, or even just shootings around campus. So I think, you know, we're looking at the latest information from the New York Times, which they cited an estimate of over 200 school shootings since 2013, starting with Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, and then the recent shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. And I think many of us will go back even further to Columbine and in 1999. We like to believe that incidents like this would never happen on Guam, but the reality is that we have to adjust and figure out how we can address this even greater challenge that goes beyond protecting, you know, just maintaining our schools, and now towards protecting our schools from gun violence in the aftermath of these national tragedies. So we understand, and we're glad that everybody's here at this roundtable, because it is not a school issue. This is an issue that's more comprehensive than that and requires the partnerships that we have with law enforcement and our other support agencies, including our social service agencies and mental health and so forth. To answer the questions posed by the committees, I know Senator Terlaje sent the questions to us. The first one was, are preemptive measures being taken to prevent firearms and other weapons being brought on school campus, and if so, what are they? So the safety and security of our schools, students, and employees is a paramount concern and priority for all school administrators. Preemptively, the department has adopted positive behavior interventions and supports, PBIS, as a framework for addressing student behavior and school climate. Standard Operating Procedure 1200-018 is our Student Conduct Procedural Manual, requires schools to establish expected behaviors. I know all of you have heard, be safe, respectful, and responsible, to teach these behaviors to students and model correct behavior by all school personnel. Another aspect of the framework is a systematic and universal method of addressing behavioral violations. Weapons use and possession is categorized as a major level 3 violation, which is the most serious, and consistent with Board Policy 405 warrants suspension. If the weapon is a firearm, Board Policy 425 requires that the student be expelled for a minimum of 1 year. Standard Operating Procedure 1200- before I go further, we can provide at the committee's request or following this hearing the documents. I do have copies of some of the shorter, simpler board policies, and then some of the SOPs are actually more voluminous, and be happy to send that to you electronically or provide copies to you. But this is just sort of an introduction to some of those documents. So Standard Operating Procedures 1200-23, known as the SPAM, which is Student Procedural Assistance Manual, and 1200-019, which is the Request for Psychological Services, provide schools the protocols to address students who may be having social and emotional challenges. So schools will establish child study teams to address academic or behavioral needs of students and to make referrals where appropriate. If teachers suspect an emotional disability, they can either refer for special education services or Section 504 accommodations. And our SPED division operates 3 emotional disability classrooms for the most serious cases, PC Guåhan, Hagåtña Johnson, and Southern High. And these are for students who require a more restrictive learning environment. Students who have serious emotional challenges can also be referred for psychological services. And if their needs cannot be met within the department, they can be referred to Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness or other mental health providers. There's a little typo on page 3, but it was supposed to be the Guam Public Schools are not equipped with metal detectors, but our personnel are trained to maintain situational awareness and to report suspicious behavior. Students are also a good source of information and intelligence, and SOP 1200-008, which is our school Crime Stoppers program, helps to facilitate intelligence for the purpose of trying to detect any issues that need to be addressed. And I think that our findings of our students are good when in reporting incidents where other students might be carrying weapons. We do know that, and we would support, a greater focus on this, that law enforcement presence on campus is an effective deterrent to discouraging students from bringing or using weapons on campus. And not only that, but to deter outside intrusion onto campus. So I think we're talking about both being proactive inside the campus. We also know that external threats are possible. Through a contract with the Judiciary of Guam, we are currently operating a school resource officer program. Right now we have 6 that rotate in pairs to the 6 high schools. They follow the community-based policing model, which is law enforcement, counseling, and also an educational role. And in addition, the department has on staff 11 school attendance officers, special deputy marshals, trained and equipped as Category 2 officers by the Police Officer Standards and Training, the Post Commission. And their primary mission is to ensure all compulsory age students are attending school, but they also do provide training support in the area of searches and seizure, as well as active shooter. And they are based in the schools as well, and they are uniformed and identifiable on campuses. So we also support their role in helping to deter any incidents. Question number 2, you want to?
Mr. Fernandez, I just want to make sure that you identify how the funding is provided for the SROs.
SROs
so
are,
folks may not know
right,
that.
so SROs are currently funded through the consolidating grant. So they are federally funded. And then the SAOs are actually our DOE employees and locally funded. How many school psychologists are employed by GDOE, and what is the standard student to counselor ratio was the second set of questions. There are 82 school counselors assigned to our 41 schools. Typically elementary schools will have 1 counselor assigned, while middle schools have 3 and high schools have 6. So the board union contract stipulates that the counselor to student ratio be 1 to 250 students. And this is consistent with a recommendation from the American School Counselor Association, and we meet that standard. However, in a few schools, the ratios are above the recommended levels, and we've identified a couple of those schools being Ordat Chalampago and BP Carbolito. The third question was, are school counselors, teachers, and school staff trained in strategies and interventions to be applied to students in emotional distress and to identify students who may be prone to violence? The social and emotional health needs do have a significant impact on students' academic success, and so just over the past couple of years, we've put more emphasis in establishing a school-based behavioral health program. So I want to recognize that effort because this is done without any necessarily additional resources, but we did want to utilize our resources in-house and to bring on additional psychologists to try to help build an in-school, school-based behavioral health program prior to having to go to an external agency like our partners at Behavioral Health. So currently we now have 3 psychologists providing services to approximately 29,000 students. That's a lot of students, so obviously, we're not able to serve as many as we possibly might, potentially be able to serve. But we have established a program to work with school counselors who are working towards their licensure as licensed professional counselors to work under one of our psychologists. So, meaning that we're leveraging our existing counselor workforce to try to help us in providing services to students. And this has added 4 more practitioners to the team. So we do a bunch there. I won't go through the whole list. You'll see a listing of the types of services that are provided through the school-based behavioral health. And then the set of bullet points goes through the types of training that are provided to the clinical team and by the clinical team to faculty and staff. And so we can talk more about any of those if you're interested. The final question, what is GDOE visitor policy and procedures? Are there challenges to policy implementation, and how can it be improved upon? So our visitor protocols are governed by Board Policy 630 and SOP 07-005 related to campus security. So Board Policy 630 is based on, section in the law, Section 7109 of Chapter 7 and 17 GCA. Requires all persons entering a DOE campus to immediately proceed to the administrative office and establish their purpose for being on campus. And it further clarifies the principal's authority to grant access for visitors on campus and further establish penalty of imprisonment or fines for failure to comply. And this has been, actually this is something to emphasize. The reason why we say school administrators is because when we're responding to issues of gun violence at a school campus, we defer and we actually emphasize to the principals that they're in charge. You're on site, you're basically incident command for any incident. So we try to be very supportive of their authority to make decisions that are important for safety purposes. SOP 07-005 is a campus security SOP. It requires school administrators to ensure they maintain safe and secure campuses free of intruders and situations that put student, faculty, and staff at risk. Part of that is having personnel assigned to the front gate to establish one entry and exit gate and secure campus after all students have entered. So before visitors enter the campus, assigned personnel are to retrieve a picture ID and maintain a log capturing the name of the visitor's vehicle and so forth. So we did meet with the principals just the other day to go through the issues, whether they were in full compliance, whether there were any challenges, and we did get some feedback with regard to having enough staff to permanently assign throughout the day. And we did get some concern about some gates. There isn't anywhere for a staff member to locate themselves. There are in some schools you see there's a monitoring station that's at the gates. So I think the board and the management's commitment is to try to see if we can provide some of those gate monitoring stations, or to work with the private sector to get donations to do that. And at the same time, we're going to work with the schools to make sure they're properly staffed. I mean, I think the issue is, obviously with staffing shortages, they would have to pick and choose what the priority is. So we're emphasizing to them that, given the reality of the situation and the threats, we need to have somebody out of the gate, but you need to let us know what your consequences are, because that means one less school aid in a hallway, one less school, there's other needs on campus. So we did ask them to kind of let us know the consequences, but we want to make sure they're in full compliance with this SOP. Visitors are issued a pass with instructions to display on their person and proceed to the main office to sign the visitor's log. So, that basically concludes the answer to that question. And I think, as you know, the situation with active shooter, it's very rare. If you look at it from a risk standpoint, it's almost low risk. You're more likely to get hit by a car. But at the same time, when something happens, it's devastating to the community. So we're trying to figure out how to address something that's rare but very devastating in the allocation of our resources. So, we did have that conversation with our school administrators, and we want to support them. And we also want to recognize that our school, our administrators, faculty, and staff, they're on the front lines if something should ever happen. So I think it's in our interest to try to figure out ways to improve and support their efforts on campus.
Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. I actually just wanted to ask two quick questions in response to, I know that I sent you a letter in this regard, and I really appreciate, being able to point to a SOP and things that you already have in place. My concern, and I know that you said you spoke with the principals, I'm so glad that you're able to talk with them and kind of get their feedback too, because it's my understanding that while you have the SOP in place, it might not be enforced in every single one of the campuses. And so I just wanted to make sure that that's what we're doing for every single one of the campuses for all of our students. But in addition to that, I wanted to ask about staff and faculty badges, because my daughter was a new student in an elementary school this year, and as she was entering the campus, even in the second and third month, she would run into people, aides, maybe a new teacher that was assigned to that school, and it's a new adult in this environment. And if they're not wearing badges that signify that they're either a staff member, a faculty member, an adult that's supposed to be in the school, then sometimes our students can I guess, not feel as comfortable or not, if there's a person that's on the school campus that's not supposed to be there, then all of the students can be alerted to that. That person does not have a badge, they don't have a guest pass, they don't have their staff ID or their staff badge. So that's something that we can do today that's probably not going to cost a lot of money, that can, everybody can have their eyes and ears open and make sure that just kind of protecting the campuses.
Right. So in response to that, I think you're right about enforcement, and that's why we had that conversation with principals, and we'll continue to, in our principals' regular meetings, ensure that they're aware. I mean, we have multiple SOPs out there and board policies, but the issue is, enforcement and compliance. So we did make it clear that we understand you have a staff shortage here and there. There might be decisions you have to make about, when you're assigning someone at the front gate, or whether whether you're trying to staff lunch or recess or so forth. There may be decisions you have to make, such as maybe that's the time you shut down the office. We might get angry parent calls, but we want to make sure the kids are safe as a primary. So I think it's part of that. What they need is communication from the board level and from us, and we did that. We said, look, you have a lot of responsibilities, but what we're saying to you is, safety is paramount. So let's focus on these components, and let's get to 100% compliance for peace of mind. Now, on the badges, I do want to say that even before this, we were pushing to have everybody get a badge, and we went through some of the discussion about who's going to pay for it, and so I think we worked it out where a lot of the schools, when they get their school pictures, and the provider comes in, the vendor comes in, we said, go ahead and have your picture taken there. And when you submit it, we'll take care of the lamination and the cards. So our effort is to try to get everybody credentialed. So I've been seeing piles of badges coming for me for signature to sign off on after they go to HR for verification. So that effort's ongoing, but I think that's an extra level of security.
Again, I would just want to thank you for empowering our administrators and letting them know that you have their back. If they're the ones that have to make the call, they're the ones that are on the ground and have to kind of be that incident commander in a sense should anything happen. So I appreciate that. One other thing that was brought to my attention by a parent was that at their school they have sometimes construction and maintenance workers going in and out, and again it's the same thing where these adults are coming onto the school campus and kids aren't aware of who these adults are, why they're there. So again, it's just that extra precaution that we can take.
So fair, and thank you for that. I think that's something we'll have to add to our list of how to address. I mean, there's a flip side to it, which we're also aware of, and something we're working on is when we do emergency response plans, we typically think of your faculty and staff and your students, but then we realize we've got Sodexo employees, we've got maybe maintenance vendors who might be there, cleaners, and they have to be notified, they have to have a role, and they have to be aware of it. So working through the situation to make sure that our vendors on campus understand, they get the communication and there's an alert, they then take protective measures themselves. So that's something we, in our past, maybe a drill about a couple months ago, we realized that the Sodexo employees were, they were aware, but it wasn't through a formal protocol. They just happened to get an email, they were on a channel, they said, oh, well, there's something happening, let's shelter in place. But we're going to do, improve the explicit protocols for that.
Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. I have a few questions just to, you identified funding you're getting from your consolidated grant. Has there been any requests or funding provided by Homeland Security at all? Just a general question. Right. Is there any money coming from Homeland Security?
Multi-hazard, but not specific to.
And the only reason why I'm asking that is because there's a lot of things that Homeland Security provides support to all the law enforcement. I mean, it impacts the students, our children. And as the SROs are out there, you can only get so much money to help the SROs. But if you don't have enough, that's quite dangerous. Then they know which school is more vulnerable. That's one I'm hoping that you'll be able to find out about that. And then the other one is that as students are required to be in uniform, I haven't seen anybody in any of the schools have a uniform. So that may be something you may want to look at. Students require you have a uniform. You can't have everybody have their ID cards. It wouldn't be anything wrong if the staff and faculty has a uniform, so that when parents and anybody visits the school, you'll know who they are. When the SROs are walking the hallways, they'll spot that ain't the uniform of the school. it makes it a lot easier for everybody to spot everybody. And I don't think it'll be as expensive as it is. It is expensive already for the students and the parents that they face that. So I just wanted to throw that, give you that opportunity to consider that, and then you can move on from there, okay?
Yeah, I mean, do you have any answer on the Homeland?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I was just going to comment that the Department of Education does have a pretty good relationship with Homeland Security in the sense that we have a multi-hazard mitigation grant award from them, but it's primarily focused on addressing issues of natural disasters. We did have a meeting with the HLS advisor a couple of weeks ago, and we did talk about specific issues to safety. And they did broach the idea that they would have some funding possibly to help us with possible strobe installations in our schools to help with some kind of signaling for any type of emergency situation, whether it be an active shooter event or any other type of emergency. So we don't have funding in place right now specific to safety, but we've started that discussion.
Is the visualization? The other thing is just mostly it's partnership, and I know that we're also, whether it's any of our law enforcement agencies, funding's important and for sure, but I also just want to appreciate the training that's provided, as well as we're embarking on a new project to try to get, what's it called, visualization?
Infrastructure Visualization Program, IVP. Was the,
right, and this is
from Homeland Security.
From Homeland Security, right.
Yeah, this is to be able to get, a sense of the layout of our school facilities, and if we're able to do that for all schools, then one of the challenges for law enforcement has always been when we respond, we need to be able to know where we're going to go on campus.
Exactly.
And so, that may not be, it's technical assistance that's being provided, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, and just ask them money also to fix your schools because they're using it for shelters.
Yeah.
And everybody else is paying for it except them. Thank you.
That's that hazard mitigation.
Okay, and how much are they looking at giving you? You got 41 schools. They got enough money to fix all 41 schools. So they use pretty much how many schools? When there's a typhoon? 10, 20?
Total of 15
How many?
15 schools.
They use 15?
Max, yeah.
So that's good.
That's full throttle if we had all our shelters open.
Well, they're normally already announced to be open. So I just wanted to make sure that you're asking for everything you can get from them because, they're always willing to say, Mr. Superintendent, can you open these schools? And you're caught with opening it, but there's no money to pay for your employees there. There's no money to secure the school so that when the SROs and all the students come back, there's, nobody has the great layout but the folks that are in there.
I want to thank you for that. I mean, I do, you are well aware, having been on the board, of the emergency response procedures when it comes down to typhoons. So a lot of our staff, our administrators are trained to respond. Our staff are trained. They spend, they're there overnight, and they basically shift to shelter mode versus, away from education mode to shelter mode. And then, we are the primary shelters. I do appreciate, I know there was funding that was provided to the mayors to harden their gyms. And so we've been working to see whether that would also be an option in the event that we do see that, weather issues, whether the mayors will house their residents in those shelters so we can open schools quickly. And I know that there's a need for training there, and we've been happy to help provide training to their staff should they need to, continue to go in that direction.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody?
Yeah. Hi. Thank you, Senator San Agustin. I'm sitting around the table. I represent the parents on the board, and I'm comfortable with my kids. I know that the Department of Education has its policies and procedures. We're dusting it off. We're trying to close the gaps. But I think there's one group that's missing from here on this table, and that's the charter schools. I mean, we have our policies here in place and things that we're doing, but I'm concerned for these other students that are also in the charter schools. Do they have plans in place too? I think that's a question that the committee can also ask them to kind of look at. There's 2,000 kids over there and teachers. And I think the message that I got yesterday from talking to the administrators is, even in the shootings at the schools, some teachers also got hit, and so these bullets don't discriminate, and the administrators and the teachers, they want some support. And as we look at the budget constraints within the Department of Education, I think it's very important that we look at everything across the board and how do we provide those safety measures. But I just wanted to point that out, that I think, understanding that we have these policies and procedures in place, and we are going to dust it off. Mr. Guåhan here he was a teacher, he still is a teacher, and I'm learning a lot from him about some of the issues that when he was in the Department of Education as a teacher, as it pertains to safety. But I think that everything across the board, even the private schools, I think should have some sense of training that we put our they're all our kids. And so I'm not certain how that's going to play out, but I think I just want to add that to the conversation, that if the Department of Education is also going to get called to explain some of our procedures, that we also look at other areas that is funded by the government and ensure that all the other government agencies also have some active shooter training. I think that's very important. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. And you're right. Not only the private schools or charter schools, but we even have to look at UOG and GCC, because that's an open campus on both sides. But that's something that we will bring up after this event.
Thank you, Acting Speaker, for calling this joint meeting. As was mentioned, a lot of it is really geared towards prevention. Hopefully in round 2, we can look at the impacts of applying these practices that does on the students and the schools, and also with the other partnering agencies. So the Judiciary SRO questions. Did you receive a copy of the questions that we... No?
Actually, we were prepared, though, to answer any of the questions regarding training.
Okay, so just to understand the SRO scope of duties, right? The level of training they receive, and what they do to deter gun violence for the Judiciary SROs. And then also...
I think we had sent the question to Vince, the marshal. Yes, right? Is that correct?
Well, as you
Mr.
know,
Napati and so both of you.
The school resource officers are actually, and have been contracted with the judiciary in partnership with DOE since 2011. So they have all gone through extensive training, and as the superintendent indicated, they are NASRO trained, which is the National Association of School Resource Officer Training. They've received training, and it's called a triad approach. So they're not only there for police presence on a daily basis. They're there for law-related education, anti-bullying. They do a lot of training, but we're also post-certified. All the SROs are post-certified. They receive basic firearms training, basic officer survival, active shooter training, and we have actually brought Vince Napati here to explain that kind of training. As you know, the officers are not armed, although they are required to go through firearms qualifications. They are not armed in the school, and that is at the request of the Department of Education.
Okay, thank you. Do you, in this process, do the SROs also, because I know they walk the schools and everything, do they also look to identify students that are prone to violence? You know, do they, of course I'm thinking they would work with the administration at the school to say maybe this student is at risk, maybe some proactive actions taken to help a student. There's been a lot of fights going on after school, putting people in danger that could escalate to someone responding in a more violent manner as far as like active shooter. I mean, these responses from children when they're bullied, it has a great impact. So are the SROs trained in that way?
Again, the SRO is extensively trained, and what's great about our partnership, it's in line with juvenile justice reform. And as you know, the probation officers are actually juvenile probation officers, so they have information on pretty much all the criminal caseload, the offenders that are currently in the schools, in many of the public schools. So there's an eye out, and they have the direct, they're a conduit, and they have direct communications with the probation officer that's probably assigned to that child in the school.
So there's a continuous communication?
Yes.
Okay. Are there other related strategies and training interventions that the SROs go through with the schools as well?
I'm going to let Vince handle that because he actually does, and this helps address Mark's question. He does active shooter training in public schools, private schools.
Okay, thank you.
So currently, the Judiciary of Guam has trained over 14,000 people, 10,000 of them being at the DOE in the public setting. The strategies that we're talking about, we're looking at these laws, we're looking at all these different policies are in place. If you look at the program, the National Association of School Resource Officers, you're going to see that wherever there's a school resource officer on a campus, they're actually armed. And so the SRO program plays several parts in the school community. One, they become mentors to these students. The second is they do educational outreach stuff where they're out there talking and presenting to the students. So it's almost like a prevention program, letting them know what are right, the rights and the wrongs, and talking to them about law. The third thing is enforcement. And so if something were to happen, and our school probation officers that are in the schools right now currently already know who are already on probation. So if we're talking about the ones that are already in the system, the school probation officers are already aware of who they are. They work hand in hand with the administration to be able to, if there is a troubled child, they offer that support as well. I noticed that in the questions you were asking about search and seizure. Well, since the Post Commission was enacted, everybody at the Judiciary of Guam has complied. And so everybody has conformed to the standards and everyone's trained properly. Now, as it relates to the SRO program, I think the biggest factor is we're one of few schools around the United States that do not arm their SROs. And so I saw a question here about disarming, but if a bad guy walks into a school armed with a AR-15 and our SROs are armed with batons and pepper spray, there's no way in officer safety that we look at the bigger picture, is he going to be able to mitigate that situation? But I can honestly tell you, based upon the commitment and dedication of those SROs, they probably would try. And so we are not arming them with the proper tools as well. Now, I don't think if you put any other law enforcement agency into the schools that they're going to consider not bringing their weapon into that school. And you can have all the laws in place like the United States and our Constitution, right to bear arms, but you're going to see that even with strict guidelines and laws in place, that the bad guys are still going to get those weapons. And if they wanted to do harm, whether we have an unarmed security guard at the front entrance of the school, that unarmed security guard is not going to stop a perpetrator from coming in. And so I think the biggest thing here, it's an island-wide response to law enforcement, is proper education in the school systems, allowing everybody. So for example, the marshals, based upon all our programs that we do with Department of Education, we actually train in those schools at night. And so every time that we do active shooter training, we pick a school to go train in, so that our field guys that are out serving documents, if they get called upon and there's an active shooter, they can respond, and knowing that if they go to that school, they've already trained in that school. And so we appreciate the fact that these guys are allowing their venues to be used, but they don't realize that the bigger picture is our officers are actually training in the schools. So it makes it a lot easier response. Now, I think the Post Commission has hit it right on the nail by standardizing all training. Now, based upon the curriculum of the Post Commission, which I think is a more vital role than in the past year, we've been discussing PFQT, but we really haven't sat down and discussed the most important things, which is the curriculum that the Post Commission is driving forward and saying, this is the curriculum, based on the curriculum, these are the testing objectives for each of these categories. And so active shooter is a component, a requirement within the Post Commission. And so with that Post Commission, everybody needs to conform to whatever curriculum that the Post Commission adopts with active shooter. Now, whatever that is, I'm not sure at this point, but I'm sure that every entity, law enforcement agency, is already conformed to their standards based upon their agency's response. Now, with the marshals and the probation, we've taken I wouldn't say we've taken our policy, we've taken Guam Homeland Security initiatives into the schools. And so about 1.5 years ago, we started to do extensive training with DOE students. So that's where the 10,000 has come from. So we've launched a pilot program with Department of Education, and we decided to come in there, show the run, hide, fight video, put our PowerPoint presentation in. We did a weapons demonstration so they can hear the stimulus response to it. So stimulus response, you can see it, you can hear it. And so the children or the students were very receptive to it. They were comprehending, okay, these are dangerous weapons, this is what it sounds like.
I'm just gonna, a weapons demonstration, and what do you mean by that?
Well, we fire off submunition rounds because...
Wait, what?
We fire off submunition rounds so they're blanks. And so what it is we bring it to the schools, we allow them to do what we call a shelter in place or a lockdown. Now, there's a difference between sheltering in place and locking down.
What grade level do you do this at?
These were high school level.
Secondary, okay.
Right. And so what it is, if you look at the trend across the United States, and I'll give you a perfect example. When Sandy Hook was...
Could I just ask if this is a policy of the Department of Education, do you have this in writing, what it is that you're doing in the schools, what you just described?
Yeah, so we have a curriculum, it's curriculum based.
It's a curriculum that's been adopted by the board or allowed, it sounds like?
No, this was basically just for this particular training only, so it wasn't a policy matter.
How often does it occur?
Okay, so within that 1 year's time, we hit almost every high school. And so what it is it's we teach the students how to shelter in place, meaning
Yeah, if you've got it in writing, if you could just submit it, we'll pass it. You have the in writing, then we'll just pass that to the entire committee. What it is that training involves.
I mean, I can give you my curriculum and give you what we did. It's not
yes, that's the whole point. We want to know what the students are being exposed to, what they're, that type of thing. Thanks.
Okay. And so what it is once the drill starts, they're taught to shelter in place and lock it down. If the teachers aren't there, because the majority of times what you're doing is you're teaching teachers to actually allow their students to drill this. But sometimes the teachers aren't there, or sometimes, like you said, teachers have a different responsibility in lesson planning and all that, so they don't have enough time to do active shooter drills. And the common thing, right, is we do a lot of active fire drills, but if you look at it in a public building, there's no one has actually died from a fire. And we're so good at it because we've drilled it. I mean, I remember going to school and drilling my entire life. But if we look at active shooter, we're saying that we've never had an active shooter happen on Guam. But we're wrong. Seventh-day Adventist Clinic, that was an active shooter event. We called it man with a gun, but somebody already died. And so going forward, what the training did was we showed them how to shelter in place. We showed them how to evacuate. And so the training ran for about a little over a year.
How many schools did you do this in?
What was that?
Did you do this to all the high schools?
We did majority of the high schools.
But not all?
Not all.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marshall. Yes.
Could I ask of the probation office, what kind of authority do the SROs have when they're on campus? Can they conduct searches if they're suspicious that somebody might be carrying a gun? Can you describe that? What kind of authority you have in that?
With regards to the SRO, as far as the searches that we don't really participate in are the administrative searches. So if DOE decides that they want to search, the kids coming through, we sort of tell our SROs that they can observe it, because if they partake in that search and contraband is found, then that sort of jeopardizes that. But if the SROs are on campus and they see it, let's say they see a couple of kids together and they're then yes, then they can go ahead and investigate that kind and do searches in that way. So we do work closely with GPD. Each school, it works pretty close with the precincts of that village. So we are the liaison between GDOE and GPD. So if a crime does occur on school, they vet it out, they package it, and then they call the precinct. GPD has been very good in responding, and we've done this since 2011. So if, for example, there's contraband, intoxicated minor, things like that, GPD does respond, and they will decide if they're going to take the child off campus or if they're just going to have them, in other words, give them an NTA, and then they'll report to the court later.
Thank you. Yes, Superintendent.
No, just as a reference point, I'm just wondering if anybody around the table might have it. Mr. Anderson, but just letting me know that perhaps it would be informative to let you know that we are acting pursuant to an executive order that requires that we work with the spectrum of law enforcement agencies to address active shooters. So that might, I think we were just saying that was the basis for these partnerships. So I don't have that on hand, but we could try to provide that.
Thank you, Superintendent. If it's okay, I'd like to transition to GPD. Again, I apologize that the questions didn't get to you in a timely fashion, but it was emailed to the chief. And I think you have a copy. Do you mind just going down the line to make it easier for us?
Sure.
And answering the questions?
We try to answer these questions to the best that we can.
Sure.
Because like we talked about, we didn't receive the questions in advance. We just now got it. Are guns and other weapons being brought onto the school campuses? Not that GPD is aware of or reported to us. I think the most that I've seen, at least I can speak for the northern area, which is my jurisdiction, under my command, are bullets being brought in by kids and found by the school, and we're called in and we confiscate it. And of course, GDOE has their policy in place as far as they do a lockdown, even for a bullet that's found, and then we come there, we make sure it's clear, and we confiscate the bullet and we take a report. But not that we're aware of as far as guns.
Sorry. Actually, Captain, do you think that that's a good policy for them to be locking down the schools if a bullet is found? Do you think that that's a...
I think it's not necessarily always a lockdown. It depends on the circumstances. They have that administrative control as far as this question is concerned. Okay. What are the type of firearms legally sold in Guam and the legal age to purchase one? To my understanding, it's 18 for, I believe it's for rifles, shotguns, and then 21 for pistols. I know, I see the question's gonna come here pretty soon, right? Why? So I was just talking to my other captain here, and he indicated that it's probably because of the concealment issue, right? You can conceal a pistol more than you would a shotgun or a rifle. Makes logically makes it a logical thing, right? So moving on here, are there cases of illegal firearms being sold? Well, again, we only can speak of what is reported to us, and as far as we're concerned, that may not even be revealed to us, because especially you have a lot of criminal activity that occurs behind closed doors that we're not made aware of or is reported to us. But as far as we're concerned, no, not that's reported to us. Yes.
I think the way we find out about illegal firearms, they're arrested on something else,
Yes.
Domestic violence, and
Yes.
under domestic violence, a defendant has to turn in their firearms,
Yes.
and all of a sudden the marshal sees the firearms, there's no firearm ID. You should see the number of weapons that are still currently at the Superior. There's a armory, and these are illegal firearms that were seized with no identification. I know the Superior Court of Guam is trying to work with the Guam Police Department way back when I was there to try and dispose of those firearms. So, Senator, I think a lot of the illegal firearms come as a result of not a direct investigation, but inadvertently to some other crime that we end up then, by order of the court, turning in those, or a search of the defendant's home, and then all these firearms are seized.
The next question here, are these, or are there cases of minors purchasing guns illegally? Again, not that's reported to the Guam Police Department that I'm aware of in my jurisdiction, and from speaking to the other captains here from their jurisdictions, it's not been brought to our attention. None in the schools, you know, that's occurred or has been brought to our attention. And again, when we respond to other cases, you know, throughout the island, we've not encountered any that I can currently remember or recall. Okay, the next one down is the language in the current law, Chapter 60, Title 10, Guam Code Annotated, does not include the definition of a semi-automatic firearm and is unclear as to the legality of a semi-automatic firearm's ownership. Please clarify what a semi-automatic firearm is and if it is legal. And please clarify the difference between a semi-automatic and submachine gun firearm and what they are used for. I'll defer that to Captain Darren Caldwell.
Semi-automatic means when you pull the trigger, you get one round fired out of the weapon, pistol or rifle. An automatic is one single pull, excuse me? Yes. Fully automatic is one pull of the trigger and multiple rounds are fired continuously until you release the trigger. Semi-automatic weapons are legal. That's what most of the pistols are legal to be sold on Guam. Please clarify difference between a semi-automatic and a submachine gun. Well, submachine gun is a small caliber machine gun that fires full automatic, and semi-automatic, like I mentioned before, is where you pull a single pull of the trigger, fires a single round. What are they used for? Protection, hunting, there's all kinds of uses. Sport.
People just like go target practicing with automatics or semi-automatics, but we've never heard of any incidents, of course.
Sorry, just press it down, yeah. Thank you.
I think more, you know, sports, you know, target practicing with these automatics or semi-automatics that we've heard of, but none as far as incidents or cases out there that's related to it.
Or people collect them.
Collector's items.
And then the efficiency of background screening procedures in detecting felony conviction, domestic violence, drug history, conviction, history of mental illnesses. Are these gaps that are there gaps that needs to be addressed in this case?
The application process at our records and identification section, I think it's very thorough. These are all specified on that application form.
And they go through an FBI
And they go through the FBI background check, either through APHIS or NCIC, which is pretty much controlled by the courts.
Okay, and since May of 2014, Public Law 32-150, there has been a reported increase in the number of concealed weapons licenses issued. What has been the effect on GPD, and does GPD need or want more discretion with concealed firearms licensing?
When this came out, of course, we weren't comfortable with it. You know, just the fact that people can actually go out there and,
right,
you know, in public and conceal weapons, right? It's to our disadvantage, of course.
Yes.
But we have not really encountered any incidents regarding concealed firearms. There was one incident that I can recall most currently was the Harmon shooting, where this individual, I think somebody threw something at his car. He stopped,
right,
came back, and shot him. So that's probably the most current incident and the only incident that I can recall.
Okay. What is a bump stock? It says block stock, but I think they mean bump stock device. Are these devices legally sold on Guam? If so, is this a violation of current law which prohibits the sale and use of machine guns, submachine guns, and automatic rifles? Why or why not?
A bump stock device is a replacement butt stock for a semi-automatic rifle that allows the user to fire the gun as if it's a full automatic rifle without changing the internal mechanisms and creating a fully automatic weapon. So yes, it is legal. Are the devices sold on Guam? I do not know. However, you can easily purchase these on the internet.
And yes, please.
I actually made a couple of calls to try and get some of these questions answered. From what I gathered so far, and I want to make sure, after this, I'll make sure I can verify the information that I received from another officer. Bump stocks, there were several bump stocks sold prior to the Las Vegas shooting by JTM. Since then, there haven't been any sold. They can actually be purchased online, though.
That's JTM and Jigo?
Yes.
But it makes a gun automatic?
Close to me.
It fires at a similar rate as an automatic weapon. The cycle rate, number of rounds fired, is close to fully automatic.
But automatic weapons are not legal?
No, they're illegal.
Per current law, the sale of mufflers, silencers, or devices for deadening the sound of discharged firearms on Guam is not legal. Do you know of these devices being sold on Guam?
Not that we know of.
Do you know these devices, perhaps you track something and perhaps they're purchased on the internet being shipped to Guam?
Not that we know of.
Okay.
However,
have you come across them?
Over the years, especially with the narcotics trade, you come across, these people, these drug dealers with these type of illegal weapons and silencers. But that's my only personal experience with silencers on Guam.
Okay, and last question. Are firearm and ammunition storage regulations and penalties effective in preventing children from accessing guns and accidental shootings? And you can answer this question very honestly, please. Go ahead and press the...
The Weber law is the only mechanism that's in place right now to prevent children from obtaining the firearms, especially at homes. But since then, we have not really experienced or anything been reported to us that there were any accidental shootings from children obtaining firearms that were not safe at homes.
Okay. Do you think that there is some kind of policy that we can put in place as a further preventative action other than the Weber law?
We can probably come up with another, policy that might, in addition to the Weber law, that we can probably review to assist in making it more safe, if that's what it takes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Captain.
Thank you. Madam Attorney General, yes. Oh, Senator Castro, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple questions. First of all, Ms. Brennan, congratulations on your recent promotion. And to the credit of Mr. Napoti, I can attest about 8 years ago, it was your entity that came to a private school that I was teaching at and conducted, I think, active shooter training for the faculty, so I appreciate that. A couple questions. I know historically and throughout the nation, at least in my experience at the department, the SRO program was once administered either wholly or in partnership with the local police department. And I think on my final year at DOE, it was in partnership with the Attorney General's office, at least through some contractual arrangements. So this question's for the chairman of the board. Mr. Mendiola, is the current arrangement with, in terms of having the SRO housed or in partnership with the judiciary something you plan on continuing as a policy move? I think it's a policy statement whenever you dedicate monies to a certain program. That would be the first question, and then I have two follow-up questions for the subject matter experts. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator. I think it's an operational issue that the superintendent will provide guidance to the board if there's any policy that needs to be addressed. I do know that now that we've kind of, we're dealing with the budget issue for a while, now we're kind of dusting off some of the policies and procedures within the department, and this is an opportunity for people to provide input. I'm actually glad that I'm here sitting around the table listening to this conversation, because I think we can enhance or strengthen the structure within the Department of Education, and basically just we need the support. I think from what he was explaining with regards to curriculum, I think we have to make sure that all the schools are aware and that we have that training in the school system, and even for the central office. You just never know where things will turn south, and we need to be able to respond to those things. But I'm confident in the leadership of the department. I know Mr. Anderson and his team are, when we have our board meetings, they inform the board of certain areas that need policy changes. But well aware of that, sir. I think we're going to address some of these issues now that we're actually a part of this conversation.
Sure. Okay. So since you redirected the question, let me ask the question of the superintendent. Are there intentions? Do you anticipate continuing the current partnership, or given the fiscal realities today, are you rethinking possibly administering the program out of the Department of Education to augment, to use his term, operations?
Right. So the SRO program is federally funded. So as you can guess, as we sort through the local government's financial situation, we also are looking to the federal side to determine how big the impact will be from the federal tax reform laws. So we should know. Usually we know about April when we visit with our U.S. DOE counterparts. They will give us a preliminary allocation, and then we'll take that and adjust. So we are concerned that there may be a decline in resources, and with any type situation, we would always revisit how we are allocating those funds to our priorities. With regard to the SRO program, we have been in partnership. The judiciary responded to an RFP. It was a solicitation for services when the SRO program was first designed under the federal funds, and so they responded. They've been working with our schools, and we have constant conversation about how to improve. One of the challenges I think that we all recognize is that I think the desire is, and especially year by year, to have security presence. Not just security. Obviously there's other functions that the SROs play, but to have some type of presence in all of our schools if possible. I think the world has changed so quickly. So I think that's if that's a desire. One of the constraints is the cost for the SRO program, given the federal funds and the fact that might be impacted. And so we've had ongoing discussions about how to support the SROs. We know that sometimes when a probation officer position opens, our folks will look at that as a way to promote, and we encourage that. But our effort in DOE is to see if we can expand. So that's really a resource issue. So I want to raise two options that we've been looking at recently. Obviously, we have our SROs in place. We've been looking at maybe expanding to the middle schools and then beyond that. So we've had some conversations with GPD about their reservists and whether their reservists there might be an opportunity for reservists to put in some of their hours and somehow find ways to cover stipends to address that. I don't know that that's feasible. Obviously the reservists are a voluntary portion of the police force, and we would need to review that. So that's one option we were kind of kicking around as a possibility, and that might require further thought and maybe even legislative action. The other possibility which we want to build around is we do have student attendance officers who have been filling some of these roles in-house to try to support our training, try to support incidents that are happening on campus. So the discussion with Mr. Anderson and our SAOs is, would there be a possibility of building around, improving training, building around, expanding that that component of the department to provide broader coverage for our schools. So those are three options. They're not fully cooked yet because each of them has pros and cons and costs associated with it. But these are ongoing discussions I just wanted to make you aware of.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could just now direct my two questions. First of all, tremendous amount of respect for both the SROs. I see an SRO here, and also Ms. Santos and her team with the school attendance officers. But now the question to Vince, or maybe Ms. Brennan, are SROs armed?
SROs are currently unarmed.
They are unarmed. And then
They
maybe
are trained in firearm safety. They are trained, they're post-trained, trained in active shooter, but they are currently unarmed when they're deployed into the schools.
the next question would be, do they have the power to arrest?
Okay, so the Post Commission allows to standardize everybody's training. So the answer to that question is yes, they do.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. And then my last question, Vince, since you're on the mic there. In your opinion, should SROs be armed, period?
So if you look at the national statistics with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, you're going to see that 20% across the nation of schools that have SROs in it are armed if they're sworn. Now, a lot of the events that are occurring across the United States are happening to schools that have part-time SROs that are not there on certain occasions, or they don't have an SRO, period. And so this is where you're getting those school violence occurring. Now, the real world, I mean, a perfect world, have an SRO in every school. And the reason why I say this is because if you look at the stats, in the school setting, average age for active shooter is 14 years old. That's the person in middle school just getting into high school. And so our SROs are currently in the high school area, and they're not in the middle schools where they should be mentoring them. So if funding was available, you should have an SRO in every school. And you have to think about it that way because in elementary level, they're considered a soft target. I mean, now they're putting gate guards at the entrance of the schools, but that's not going to stop people from coming in there. And so if you, in a perfect world, SROs in every school, in a perfect world, you may enact a law that allows Department of Education, because they have like these 3 jurisdictions in the United States that have school police officers that do it for their jurisdiction. So that would be another way. And I think you were talking about the SAOs. I think you're going in the right direction by training the SAOs who are Category 2 in the post standards. And if you bump them up to Category 1, that would just mean they would have to conform to all the requirements plus the PFQT.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much.
Senator, I just want to respond to Senator Castro, since he's Vice Chair of Education and the Committee on Education
All right.
Chair
I also
here.
want to get to the Attorney General though soon,
I'm
and then we can
on-
go around
on
again.
this
Yes,
on the-
all right.
Okay. Which, her or me? Me.
Please proceed.
Okay. Just for information, you know, our school attendance officers are doing just what the SRO are doing in the high school. And we have tried to get them to be at the same pay. But what did DOA? They rejected. And I stand behind them. Because even though they're just in the middle and elementary, the high schools, no difference. So I ask you, senators, to help us that their concern be addressed, because they're performing the same responsibilities and they were trained. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Madam Attorney General, we gave you a long list of questions, but they're pretty much similar to the questions we've heard already today, so I'd just like you to proceed. We're talking about how to deter, whether you think the laws are adequate in deterrence from your experience and what you're seeing in your office, and or if you have any recommendations as to changing the gun laws or our school enforcement laws. Please proceed.
Well, Senator, you know, our current laws have been in place for a long time. I don't see any particular deficiency in them. Can we make our laws better? Of course we can. I've not taken the time to sit down and go through either Title 10 or Title 9 or DOE's titles, but we can always look at that. I think one of the concerns is that the development of a law enforcement arm within the school is very important, however that's done. The SRO program on Guam is somewhat of a hybrid in the jurisdictions. SROs are usually police officers. And I think the fact that, we really have had pretty safe schools, it doesn't mean that tomorrow something might not happen or might happen. I think Department of Education does a great job. The reason why I'm here, Senator, is because my heart still is in DOE, having been there. I brought Fred Nishihira over here as well. And if there's anything I can do for the board and for John, and John knows this. I am there at the call to see what I can do. I think our laws are pretty tough. Our laws are preempted also by federal government, whatever the federal government provides in terms of who can own, possess, and sell. I like the fact that automatic rifles are not permitted on Guam. It's not been challenged yet under the Second Amendment, but I like the fact that it's been there for a long time. So I think we have some good laws here, Senator.
Can I ask, are there any challenges that you have encountered to prosecuting firearms violations?
No, not at all. As I said, the majority of the issues of firearms come into our prosecution of cases in the use of a special allegation, the use of a deadly weapon. So we increase the penalty, the sentencing for the violation of a main crime with the use of a deadly weapon. I can tell you that one of the issues that came to my attention as a judge, particularly when I was the judge on the Family Violence Court, and by the way, I want to let you know that the Superior Court of Guam runs the Family Violence Registry, so whenever GPD needs to do a background check, all of the judgments with regard to firearms registry, because if you are found guilty of a family violence crime, you cannot have a weapon. So I think, I hope that the computer system between the court system and the judgments and convictions and GPD is running well, although I know your LERM system is in dire need of some updating. So I think just improving the gathering of the data between the Superior Court of Guam and making sure that GPD has that data. I think for the court system, when I was a judge there, to make sure that the court has access to all the registered information, firearm registration. I'm not quite sure if that's been resolved. It was just maybe a hardware issue, being able to share that information. So I don't know if that answers your question. My years on the bench, the issue of firearms does not come up in the sense that our laws are deficient in any way.
Have you seen, GPD testified that they haven't seen many cases where children are getting a hold of firearms, and recently,
very
I guess
few.
I'm just going to verify that.
Very few. I think the Weber law and what happened to Robbie Weber was a rude awakening for all of us. I think residents of Guam and parents who want to be gun owners are protecting the weapons for the safety of their children and their neighbors' children. So we might have had one incident in the last maybe 10, 15 years, but very, very few. So I think the Weber law has been a heaven sent. And you don't protect your gun, you get prosecuted.
Do you see any issue with this where a bump stock device might be allowed, making a gun almost automatic or close to automatic, as the GPD described, versus our laws that say automatic weapons are not allowed?
If those types of devices are coming to Guam through the internet, then it might be a problem. And I think the police officers would agree that if you can modify a semi-automatic weapon by buying something on the internet, then you could make it automatic, not in character, but in performance, and that would be a problem.
Are you aware of any cases regarding gun possession within the school gun, the gun-free zone, school gun-free zone?
All I know is that kids, whether they're little kids or whatever, they like to show and tell and talk. So somebody in school is going to say, hey, she's got a gun, and it's going to get around, and believe me, the school administration will call on the resource officers to help immediately, and I think the school responds to it. And it's not just guns. I think more often here on Guam, it's knives. And I used to say, You know, I used to get the question from principals as the counsel, lawyer for DOE, can I legally search their locker for that knife? And I'll go, absolutely. You may not prosecute them because it's an illegal search, but you want to get that knife out of the locker room and throw the knife away. Who cares about suspension? Who cares about prosecution? Get the knife and the weapon off of campus. I am less concerned with, do we have enough evidence to suspend or expel a child, or do we have enough evidence to take this child to juvenile court? Get that weapon off campus.
All right. I'd like to continue the discussion, and thank you, Madam Attorney General, and all of you for participating. But if I just want to check if there are any questions or comments from anyone else who's present today. I think there's another microphone available for you. If you just raise your hand if you would like to ask a question or make a comment. Joe? Okay. I'm talking about the audience. Anyone in the audience? Yes. We'll allow them, and then we'll go around. Captain, we'll come back to you. Is that all right? We'll come back.
Hi, my name is Deborah Regis. I work both in the electronic security side of the house, and also a firearms shop owner, so gun store owner. I do have a question with regard to the safety of our children, which is major concern. I'd like to find out if along with the training, is GDOE doing anything about integrating the assets you already have, like security systems? Are you using that to help or detect an active shooter event or anything along those lines as far as detection? Because you're saying that there's someone standing at the gate watching people coming and checking IDs, but what do you know? I mean, how do you know what's in that car?
Right. So, no, I mean, there are obviously areas that continue to need to be addressed. We don't have, like we said, we do not have metal detectors, so we aren't able to have that level of technology with us. When we ask for support at the school level, and we ask for support usually around hardening facilities, and which is a response. It's not a preventive measure; it's more of a response. In some ways, it's preventive if you're saying, concrete structures for all the entire campus, and making sure the fences are effective and in good repair. But there are other requests that we've been getting for intercom systems, other communications, technology to make sure that if something happens, that people are adequately notified so we can take protective measures. But we don't have any way of, anything more sophisticated in terms of detecting things that are coming on campus. We do have the authority to do search and seizure should we have a reason to believe there's a need for that. Otherwise, it's more about observing anything unusual on campus and being able to report that and address it as we see those things happening on campus.
Is there anyone else in the audience?
Can I add to Mr. Fernandez? A lot of things that he's talking about, like a metal detector, would only work if it was a closed campus where students were able to funnel through one entrance point. And so most of the campuses on Guam are old, and so it's hard to get everybody to funnel through one entrance point. And so in lieu of hardening the schools, which I think is a great idea to do, it's education. And so in the curriculum that we were teaching faculty and staff, we were teaching the 5 stages of an active shooter. For example, in Columbine, it showed that they wrote a manifesto, they did videos, they did essays, and so it went unreported. And so now it's about when do I report it and who do I report it to? And so if you look at GHS's response to a lot of things, it's see something, say something. And so now they're putting out this awareness for active shooter. And a lot of times the most common person who's committing these offenses are people who are being bullied. And DOE currently is running programs to help with anti-bullying. And so there are things in place, there's just nothing hardened right now.
Mr. Napoli, may I ask also, who do you recommend for the listening public? Who should be notified when you say they should report these things? To who?
Well, they're taught to go to the counselors, the administrators, the teachers are. And so based upon what they're reading on their, say their essays, they're better suited to read and understand what's going on. They report to their counselors that are at the schools.
Yes, Mr. Superintendent.
If I could add that there's two things I want to just point out as areas for focus. Number one is we are dealing with a lot of things on social media as well. So I think when people see something on social media, of course it goes around and we hopefully will get notified, but there's nothing really explicit governing how we treat social media in that regard. So I think we just need to do a better job of that, because there have been incidents, not necessarily with active shooter, but like bomb threats, or somebody might come to school, that gets flagged by a student, they'll send it to somebody an adult. That adult then reports it, then we go into a response. And so, on that note, I think you've heard that we do have a risk assessment matrix, so not every incident has the same response. It really involves an assessment of the level of risk before we respond. The second issue I want to raise is that we've been talking a lot about students. One thing that we're talking about internally is that I think we have a framework for addressing issues related to students and trying to detect, if there are students in need of services who might pose a threat. But one of the recent discussions was about employees, right? So employees, or either disgruntled employees who might, have a job situation affected, or may have a situation at home that they're going through. Or we've had incidents of teachers on campus who get threatened by someone off campus, maybe a partner, maybe somebody else, and that threat gets called in. And so I think that's one area that we're going to be working on is, we can always refer a student for psychological services or some other, but I don't think we take the same approach necessarily with our employees, because they're adults. We're saying, hey, you handle your issues, but that does pose a concern that we do not have some of those processes in place.
Thank you very much. Captain Santos, you wanted to say something?
I'd like to say I commend and admire the Superior Court Marshals in their efforts to conduct active shooter training. You've taken the initiative, and it's commendable. But I'd like to ask if we can maybe work together, or GPD. There's been recent talk because you guys are conducting a lot of training out there, active shooter training, but for the most part, it's going to be GPD that responds on scene to an active shooter incident first. And so maybe what we can do is work hand in hand and make sure that we're conducting, I wouldn't be surprised if the training that is being conducted by GPD and by you mimic each other, but we still want to make sure that we're all, that we're in line with the same training and we're consistent.
I'd like to
I would actually agree with you. I think from the onset when we were doing all this training, we actually, it was a joint effort. Everybody was brought to the table. I think because of operational considerations, a lot of agency had to pull out. And so because we support, we support play by the rules, safe schools, and all of that, we actually started doing DOE. In fact, we actually trained the AGs, GMH, and so we just started going around based upon GHS, but we certainly think it should be a collaborative effort. We agree that the Guam Police Department is probably going to be the primary responders. We do have field guys out there, but majority of times it will be you. And what we're teaching these guys out there is just the administrative side. We're telling them when law enforcement do arrive, this is what you're going to expect. And so get the hands in the air, follow all the directions, don't touch the police officers. So we're giving them that educational piece so that they're aware when you guys get there that you have to do your job and they have to do theirs to be safe. So I do agree with you with training.
I got a question for the SROs. As they brought up the issue about carrying a firearm, have you ever thought of having a lockbox available at the school so in the event you need to access the weapon, because your officers are trained, they can access? I just thought I'd ask that question.
Yes, actually that was brought up, but our agreement with the Department of Education is that we will not bring it on campus.
So when the shooting starts, I guess, never mind, huh? Now, the only reason I'm just concerned about that is that maybe DOE needs to reconsider that, because when the officers are trained, the only time they'll go to the lockbox, wherever it happens to be, that's the only time they're going to get that weapon. Otherwise, you know, I just don't want to, by the time they call GPD, hopefully the person that's going to call you folks is not nervous enough where they cannot even press the right numbers. But the SRO officers on site can do what they need to do, and I would, hopefully, they would have immediate access to communication that would, because my understanding in the past, I think that, isn't the communication tweaked already where you guys can turn the code and you can hook up with GPD? Isn't that set up yet or not yet? Or it never got through? Isn't there a joint way of communication with all the law enforcement where they can actually talk to each other on the same channel, or it doesn't exist? Not yet. Golly, 9/20/18. Okay. On the issue of the school attendance officer, my understanding is that my colleague Senator Ogden had brought up that bill. Maybe we just need to resurface it and take a look at it. I'm just surprised that if DOA is taking a look at it, was there a desk audit to determine that they meet the qualification? And if they do, you know, it's beyond DOA. But if there was no desk audit to determine the school attendance officer meet the criteria to meet similar to the SRO, I just don't want us to reintroduce a bill to qualify somebody that a desk audit is saying you don't meet the category 2. We want to be in fairness, because police officers go to training, marshals, everybody in the post, there is a standard. Not just we believe this, let the desk audit determine that they meet the criteria, and then the post folks can be all in agreement that we're all one happy family.
Senator, remember that the school attendance officers are under the Competitive Wage Act, and the Department of Administration is the one that administers that. And they did submit a request, and the Department of Administration did not support that.
But DOA did not support a desk audit?
Did not support that they fall under the category of being, you know, yeah.
Yeah, we provided a lengthy description on, and they did look into the duties and responsibilities of the SAOs. So we do have some courses of action, but which we can update you on. But we are looking at ways, or not, recognizing DOA's decision. We're looking at other issues, sort of whether through the legislative authority or through the authority of the board, to try to find some resolution.
The only reason why I bring that up, if you do the desk audit, you don't have to go to DOA. No difference that way back when I was on the board, in order to get the pay raise for teachers, we went to civil service. We just skipped DOA and just went to civil service, asked them to do the evaluation, determination, the study. It was done. The teachers got their pay raise. I honestly believe you guys just take the different route. Don't wait for them, because you're never going to get anything done.
Remember,
Senator, everybody else.
Yeah, remember, Senator, that those functions are taken away from Civil Service Commission, is given to DOA. So DOA, yep. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator, clarification. So if I can just clarify real fast. I think the challenge with the Department of Administration is that they're looking literally at the law, the post commission, that doesn't recognize school attendance officers but special deputy marshals. So the issue is, by law, school attendance officers are special deputy marshals. And so we were trying to explain to the DOA that you're not going to see school attendance officer reference in the post. You're going to see references to their status as special deputy marshals, which make them category 2 officers. So it's that juncture that we're at with DOA, where they're looking literally for, where does that law say that a school attendance officer is category 2? But there is a law that identifies them as special deputy marshals, and therefore they are category 2. And as far as the department's concerned, we require them to meet all the requirements that are listed and identified in the post-commission standards.
Okay, so we'll resurface that bill that Senator Ogden introduced.
I'd just like to acknowledge we have Dr. Jonathan Guerrero from GDOE, and others from GDOE also here. Thank you for being here. And is there anything else that you would like to add? Seeing, I wanted to, you are a school psychologist? Please come to the microphone, or you can sit here near me.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of psychology and also as a licensed professional. I think school shootings in this discussion really, what I've been reading about, and I could share it with you. I just looked up quickly some articles under the American Psychological Association, and just some things that they shared, or what I've learned is suicidality and resentment are kind of some of the driving forces with the young shooters, right? And so I think in place at our department, we have trainings, and you could see in the information we provided is that our school counselors are trained to do suicide risk assessments with the students, and also to provide what we call a mental status examination. So we do trainings on this with our school counselors, and things that, so we're really pushing for behavioral health services at the school, at DOE, and I think it's a good way to catch and recognize kind of students who are marginalized, students who are bullied, and actually get them services, and it's a good preventative measure. So we are building capacity at our department, but we have 3 psychologists for 30,000 kids, and also we're responsible for training and the school counselors, and also the teachers and administrators. So, but I think there's a good push to increase the capacity of our behavioral health services.
Thank you very, very much. And I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of Mrs. Lou Beneventi from the Guam Department of Education Board. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you to all of you. All right, and Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for coming today. This is not going to be our last roundtable discussion. We're starting to see a lot of lethal violence happening around the nation, and so some of the targets is really addressing our gun laws here on our island, and also the impacts of the active shooter drills on our students, perhaps with data collection, surveys sent home to the parents, and how we can improve these tactics and procedures in different various ways when we take lessons learned from what happens nationally, and also to create a bridge between the response agencies of our public safety officers, because it is essential to know what how our judiciary SROs are functioning, how the police will respond, and that everyone is in line and understand their role and how they would approach each situation. So basically it opens this closes the gap for a communication mishap. And I think the best form, as Marshal Vince mentioned, is the post-commission. And also we'd like to address the SAO issue within the post-commission as well. So this is I'd like to thank the acting speaker for bringing us all together to this table. I mean, this is a very beneficial forum for us to have to also improve the way we protect our children's lives. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you again for being here, and thank you for your input. As the Senator said, this is a work in progress, and I'm sure it is for all of you as well, especially Department of Education, and thank you for all your work. So there being no additional individuals present to testify, this committee will continue to remain open for acceptance of any additional testimony. You can submit anything in writing and to the Guam Congress Building, 163 Challenge Santo Papa, Hagåtña 96910, the mailroom here, or through email, senatorterlajeguam@gmail.com. And this roundtable is now adjourned. Thank you very much.